So you can get started, Pradeep.
All right, welcome everyone. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
All right, a very welcome everyone. Very good afternoon. I'm really happy to see so many folks joining in and spending their afternoon or evening time with us here discussing UiPath apps, one of the hottest topics, I would say. Before we get started, I would like to introduce myself. This is Pradeep Shukla. I work for Peraton, and I'm UiPath MVP for this year. And I have one of my dear friends and another UiPath MVP with me, Andy Menon. Andy, go ahead, introduce yourself, please.
Hello, everybody. I'm Andy Menon. I am an integrations engineer and RPA SME. I am the founder of RPA Vanguard. And Pradeep and I also co-host the Automation Rocket Ship YouTube channel, where we talk about RPA topics and RPA expertise. And Pradeep and I will be co-hosting the series of 4 events for you on the topic of UiPath apps. And thank you very much for taking the time to make it to this hour.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Andy, for that. And I see in one of our attendees, I see Teddy and a few other folks else have also joined. And good afternoon, everyone. Some of you I know, and some of you will definitely build this relationship going forward and learn from each other. So coming back to today's topic, okay, so we'll start with, we don't plan to present on going through like 10 different PowerPoint slides and going through the theory behind it. But what I do plan to share is primarily to show you a simple use case, and also give you a walkthrough for UiPath apps platform itself. So let's get started with that. So there has been a lot of UiPath apps has been in the public preview, available for everyone on the orchestrator platform. When you log in on your cloud platform, you'll see apps is already available. You do not need a separate additional license for this. Um, so it's already available for everyone, accessible, so that they can go ahead and start creating their apps. Uh, when actually this came out, UiPath apps, it started as part of the whole initiative, or kind of market shift towards low code, no code platforms, right? So there has been a lot of buzz around that. The programming model or programming paradigm itself is changing towards something which is more low code, no code. And when we talk about low code, no code, a lot of people have this misconception that either it's too fancy, or it's too easy, or it's going to be too complicated, right? So there's a lot of hype around it. But the truth is, when we look at these different platforms, and when UiPath came as part of the whole overall UiPath platform, this was this actually was a need for providing a front end to all the automations, right? So that, I think that's the genesis behind it, having a app builder solution that you can, because when you're building robots and automation processes behind the scene, these are either triggered as an unattended bot, or even if they are attended bot, you are running through your UiPath assistant, right? So you have very minimal options to provide a way for users to capture input, and based on that input, go forward and use that input to customize your automation. So that, I think that is one of the areas where UiPath apps fits in very well, and it provides a overall completely web-based studio platform where you can go and build this automation. So uh, this is always, UiPath has always called it as low code, and I really appreciate that fact that they called it as low code and not just go with the whole industry term or industry fascination around low code, no code, saying that, okay, there is the least amount of code or there is no code at all that you have to create. No, primarily, what does that mean? That it is more a visual editor where you can create screen, very much similar to how UiPath Studio itself is, right? We all of you must have already worked with UiPath Studio or Studio X, so you're already aware of what visual paradigm or visual editor is and how we can create interfaces. Most of the work goes in the background, but UiPath Apps provides a way to build that front end. So let's look at a very simple use case. So I'll start with the simple use case that we built or for one of our customers to capture employee feedback. And the use case is very simple. So in general, whenever there is, and this can be used within a company, this can be used within an organization or even within a team. The beauty of it, because the development effort is very less, but you can easily distribute it among all your team members and capture that information. So that can help you in terms of building, making a decision, a database decision, right? So that's where it really becomes very handy, rather than you could alternatively, you can create something like a survey on SharePoint or some other tools. But I believe this is a very handy way to build a particular simple application and then share it with everyone. And once all the data is collected, it's all collected behind the scene, and you can write advanced robots that can process that data. Right. So as you see, there are a few other use cases that I have, but for today's discussion, because we want to start primarily what we are assuming that all of us are just getting started the UiPath apps. So today's session would be more basic in nature. I'm sure some of you might have already have some experience using UiPath apps. If you have that experience, that consider this more as a refresher, because this is the first part of the four events that we have planned throughout this month. So we'll go step by step and we will talk about these use cases and build on top of these use cases as we are presenting, as we go on and add additional features, additional complexities to it. So we have an end-to-end understanding of overall ecosystem. All right. So let's go to this app that I have, and I'll walk through the
Pradeep,
basic
can I
building
say
block as
something?
well. Sure. Andy,
Uh,
please go ahead.
yeah, just to a quick mention on the low code that Pradeep was talking about. Next week, when we talk about apps, functions, and expressions, you will see the low code feature of apps, and you will also see how easy it is. And all of that will become very clear to you in the second session. Thanks, Pradeep.
Yeah, we will talk about some of that today, going through the structure itself. And yes, so we have planned for additional features. So each of the features of UiPath, we'll try to go over each of them and try to explain more on it. All right, so let's get into this. So this is a Uh, so this is a very simple application. Okay, there is not too much complexity. So I'll show you first what it does, and then I'll go over and break it down for us. Okay, let me move this thing away from here. So let's publish this. All right. So this is a basic, very basic form that is capturing input. So primarily what is this? This is a policy addendum that a organization is trying to see what their employees think about having a 4-day work week, right? So there is some description here. The data is captured anonymously and very simple, straightforward form, right? So adoption methods, and they provide options. Okay, what do you want to do? So there are different various options that they ask for their employees to vote on. So we can say, okay, we want to do a 6 months trial, and okay, so I say fully on board, and we just submit this information. So the very little information, right? So we are just selecting a particular option that is given, one of these options, and provide some additional inputs, and I submit, and the data is submitted. Since all of this data is anonymous, so there is no user information is submitted. As soon as we submit this data, you see the form is reloaded and data is cleared here. So in a from interaction wise, it's a very simple application, right? So when you go in, there are not too many complexities, because that is how we want to be, right? So this is the purpose of this, to capture this data, but this data is valuable, rather than asking everyone to use some other platform. Let's say if the organization is already using UiPath and then they go use some other platform, SharePoint or SurveyMonkey or something, then you have to collect that data and then put that data to through further automation to actually make a meaningful decision out of it, right? So if you already have UiPath platform, this really makes sense, because now the data is already in the platform. We'll talk about how the data is being stored behind the scene and how we can really connect all of this information to Orchestrator and make a data-driven decision, right? So that is just a very simple example. But now that we know what this can do, let's go back and actually look at how we create a UiPath application. So I'll go back to the home page, and again, you just have to log into your UiPath orchestrator. Let me try to see if I can close this. All right, this is much better. All right. So on the orchestrator, when you log in, you'll log into your home page over here. Sometimes it takes few seconds to go back. So while it's loading it up, we have all the services available, and then we scroll down here and we can see UiPath Apps. As I mentioned, there are no specific licenses for UiPath Apps, so they are available right out of the gate, and we don't have to configure anything additional on it. There are a few additional things as we will talk about as we go along, when we are actually integrating the UiPath Apps with data services. Uh, or we are connecting it through integration services. That's where you would have some licensing requirements, some additional product licensing that will come into picture. But as far as building the UiPath app itself is concerned, it's pretty straightforward. So we start with that. So let's start with that. Uh, I'll call it this. All right, so this is just a name, and as it says that you can start your app builder with any existing files that you may have as a starting point, but that's not necessary to do that. So we can just go ahead and get started. And Andy, please chime in anywhere if you feel like, right? Please feel free to share your inputs. So when we start here, we have an option to actually start with available templates. So there are some templates out of the box. So we have a dashboard template, which looks like more of a profile page of a customer or of an individual. If you're looking for your HR application, it could be your HR application profile page or your organizational profile page. Form A, this template is more of an input form where you can accept data from the user, and a few other variations on the same Form B, Form C. Then you have another template that actually provides lists and details. And there's one also that provides dialog modal box, which is more like a pop-up screen. So it's not a form on its own, but it's something that comes on top of your form application. So we have few options where we can directly get started with one of these forms. For our use case, let's get started with a blank page. And I'm just trying to go over each of the components when we are trying to build our first app itself. So we
One of
select
the things that why Pradeep is starting with a blank canvas is because it's a great learning experience to put your app together when you start from a blank slate. And second, the design process of putting together the elements of your app is pretty much like drawing sections on a plain whiteboard, right? If we are in a meeting, or if you want to draw your own user interface, you would put that on a whiteboard. And the experience of designing, as Pradeep is going to demonstrate, is pretty much like putting boxes around your blank canvas and positioning your user interface elements, your controls, your the text box, the drop down list, etc., that you want to feature in your app. So our recommendation is start with the blank slate, and learn about how those controls work. And then when you take a template and work with it, you will be in a better position to know how that template was designed and how you might want to modify the template to suit your needs. But for that, the what Pradeep is going to show you is very important and fundamental to understanding how the design of apps work.
Right. So, all right. So when we click on the blank template, this is a screen that we see. So as this is the center space, this is the canvas. This is our drawing canvas. So we can put everything over here, how we want our user interface look like. On your left, you have the hierarchical structure of all the controls. So as we keep putting controls over here, this will show me a tree-like structure of all the objects and controls on this canvas. So this is very helpful, the left panel, because sometimes when you're trying to update properties, and we will see for one of the controls when we are trying to update properties, this really comes very handy. On our right hand side here, we have the page property, which is on top here, the name itself. And there are three options. So three different tabs are here, which actually defines how our user interface or how our item or an object would look like. So general is primarily your description, tooltip, data context, which is any data binding that we want to put in. That comes under the general tab. The events would be here, where we can create rules, and that way we can connect our events. We'll come back to this. Third one is a style. So style is actually, it gives you all different ways I can actually make adjust my objects on the canvas. So whether I want a canvas vertical, horizontal, or different alignments that we want, center aligned or left, right aligned, right? So we can do that. We can provide different colors. If we want to build a border, fonts, we can choose different fonts. We have margin options. So primarily what it provides, the style actually is a section that provides me all different ways to make my items or make my objects as we desire in terms of their look and feel. And the properties here would change as we add additional objects. So each object has a different style component or style properties. So those will show up over here that we can adjust as we go on. Few additional things here. So as you see, we are still on the same browser page. We are still under apps. Under App Studio, this is the application name that we created. And we have a fully loaded studio, or I would say an editor, right, where we can create and edit our application. A few additional things you would see here: preview and publish. Preview is primarily when you're still building it, you want to see how it actually looks. So we can always go to preview, which will open on a different tab or different page where you can look at it. Publish is where you can publish it. And once it is published, you can share it with your team members. Version history. So UiPath Apps comes with inbuilt source control. So what does that mean? That anytime you make any change, whether it's a minor, major, doesn't matter, it gets saved within 30 seconds. So it gets saved every 30 seconds. So in case if you do plan to move away from it, you can do that. You can save it manually before you switch context out of UiPath apps, but otherwise it actually saves it automatically every time. So that way you don't lose any information, but at the same time you have a option to go back and revert back if you have made uh, some mistake that you want to course correct. Then you have application settings. Application settings is just another panel where you can go back and change the name of the application if you want to add some icons, production URL. One another thing is here access, manage access. So what does that mean? It actually lets you control who would have access to your application. So once the UiPath app is published, uh, you can define which users, and these users are all automation users that are already defined on your UiPath orchestrator. So you can create a role-based access privileges for your app, for your application right here. You don't have to go anywhere else to define that access mode. All right. So let's go back to anything else, Andy, you want to add it on that topic?
Pretty good overview of the elements. I'm keen to get started with the design process.
All right.
And yeah, let's get out to it.
All right. So primarily this is add control. So we just go ahead and start with that. So when we click on it, it actually provides us adding control, what different controls we want to start adding. So we have input. So these are the input controls. Then we have some display controls. Display controls are primarily all the read-only objects, list, a document viewer, which can actually just load up a whole PDF, header, frames, images, and some other read-only objects like tables, label, and tabs if you want to build. So you can build a very comprehensive user interface from here. And then containers, you have containers, container layout, and page container. So, and containers are just specialized objects in a way that can actually host other objects. So let's say if I put this page container itself here. All right, so I have one page container over here. So it will just show up as a very small container. As we keep adding objects to it, it will expand from there. So now if I want to add additional control, so every time when you add a control, we talked about it, this the tree structure. Our left hand panel actually maintains this object hierarchy. So anytime we want, we can always go back and forth between objects, and that way we can identify where that object is. All right, so let's add a few additional controls, and we start with some text boxes. Let's say we just capture very basic information. Let's capture name. There's the input control. There you go. So that's my text control. So when we drop down a text object here, we have the label itself. So the label is nothing but the description of it. So let me go back to the text object here. And there is something going on here with this. All right, let me go back. So sometimes you can see here on my right hand side, these events are just moving around. Sometimes it flickers. That's one of the things we have noticed before. So we can refresh that. We refresh our screen. Since everything that we are making all the changes we are making, it's getting saved every 30 seconds. So our objects should be all persisted. So we have all the objects persisted here. So now when we refresh the page, everything looks good. So we can come back here now. All right, so let's go back here. We are on a text control. So input type is text. There is no value binding here. So we are not binding this yet to any other object. So let's go ahead and change the label. So you see this label here. So I can change it. So I'll say member name, and let me add one more control here. And few additional things, if you see here, there are already pre-built text boxes that actually provides basic validation already. So I have an email text box that already provides email validation, and we have a text box for numbers specifically. So they actually does what it says. So you have number text boxes that will do decimal validation. Emails will do the email validation. So let me add this here, and we'll go and change this. All right, so let's say this is what we are building here. We are building a review form for this dev series event 1. So at the end of this, we can use our own app to collect a feedback, how this event went. So you saw what I dropped here. This is the text area. So we can go back and you can see based on text area, the validation changes, and the properties also you can look at different properties that show up. All right. So now what we did here primarily, we just dropped a few objects here and we just changed their properties. Now I'm going to do another object here, which is a button object. So this is my event. So this event would say, let's say submit. And right now, if you see all these, all this information that we have here, all these objects, they all are left aligned, right? So I can go and I can change here in the style. So you see, these are all left aligned. I can make it center, right line, or I can expand it like this, right? So let's do that. I like this. And that's about it. So I have three input parameters here: name, a email, a feedback. And I don't have to provide any validation for email because it's already validated through that. But in case if I want to, I can add further validation on top of it. So now let's say if I create this application over here, and then I want to, I think I need to add a title. So let me put a header for this. So I know what this is about. So you see the header actually moved up in the hierarchy itself because now it's on top of it. And since this completely maintains the hierarchy of the objects, so I can always point it here. So I can say dev series 1 review. All right. And I can put different styles over here. This is a headline 1. I can make it a headline. I can make it headline 2. I have different font styles. I can bold. Color is fine. I can put a background color if I want to. So, all right, that's good. Then I'll change the font color to white, maybe. Yeah, that would look good. All right. All right. So the next step is primarily to submit this, right? So when we try to submit this information, we go over here and we look at different other properties. So what we looked at until now, we have looked at general properties for every object. So we have here, if you will, the text tooltip. We can add tooltip icon if any specific icon I want to use it, and icon property is coming because it's a button. For a text box, it won't be here. And then obviously whether we want this property to be hidden or disabled. I mean, these are some other ways to manipulate how we capture data from the UI. So you can always make use of it. Style, we also looked at it, where we can add colors, we can change font, or we can change the alignment itself. Next is events. So events is very interesting in a way, the way UiPath Apps provides options to create events and how to tag these events with the control on the screen itself. So there is already a basic event that's already available here by default. So when I click on create rule, I see a basic rule available here. So what I want to do here, so I want to show when the submission happens. Definitely, I want to go back and I want to submit this information back. And I have multiple ways to do that. I can upload this information to a storage bucket, or I can upload this information in data services. So we will look at all those items in our upcoming events. I think week 3, we will talk about more how to connect with queues and storage buckets. But for now, let's say this data gets submitted and we want to just show a message to the user. So we'll come back here. We can say your feedback is submitted successfully. Yeah, if I can type correct. All right. So very straightforward, nothing much. But you see, right, when I just select that I want to show a message, by default, I have all these options available. And I can say success warning information where I want to show this. I want to show it on top. And I want to dismiss this after 5 seconds. So that's all good. So that's about it. That's it. Just we have to put this message, and if we want to add some additional validations, we can always add as we go here. You can see these are the options that I have. I can open a different page. I can completely open a different URL on click of that event on that submit button. I can start a process itself. So whenever I submit this data, eventually the practical use case would be when the data is submitted, it goes to data service or goes to storage bucket, and then eventually I trigger a process that actually picks up that data and does further validation or further processing on that information. We can create entity record. This is on the data services. These are all data services and queue related features, and we'll talk about these in episode 3.
And
right.
just to sort of emphasize,
Sure.
there is a question on here. I think it applies to everybody. Why would you need an app? This is the primary reason why apps exist. Basically, they give the end users an ability to actually, interface with their automations and execute those automations without having to know the technicalities of where that automation is sitting, how it is deployed, or how do we pass parameters to it, right? That's the
Right.
primary reason why apps exist. And as you will see through this series, it has come a long way since then. It has integrated with the other parts of the UiPath ecosystem. And if you want to bring all of these things together in one coordinated user interface that you can then hand off to your team, apps is one of the best ways to do that.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. That's what I started with, right? That UiPath Apps is kind of a front end of all the automation, because most of these automation use cases are background, are
Right,
running in
right.
background, right?
Yeah.
So as a developer, what's going on, and
Yeah.
you can either trigger that automation with the Windows service, the command line, with your assistant, so many various ways, right?
And not just that, in my experience, I've seen that when people interact through the assistant to an automation, they still find it a little bit confusing because there are limitations on how to pass in the parameter names and stuff
Right,
like that.
right, right.
But in an app, you can make that very clear. And the other advantage is you can not only call attended automation, you can also call unattended automation,
Unattended one, yes.
because the technicalities of hosting an unattended automation and running them is much more complicated than a simple attended automation. So if you want to forget about all of those technicalities and put a great elegant face on your UiPath automation ecosystem, apps are the best way to do that.
Right. No, absolutely. Before apps, I remember there was one of my customers, we had to build a very basic SPA, a single page website, just to give them an interface to interact, because they didn't want to go ahead and do it themselves through orchestrator. Back then, for unattended automation, there is no direct way to do it. So you have to build the whole pipeline. You have to have the application capture that data and then trigger a queue in orchestrator, and then you have to build that whole integration, right? But apps actually just uh, does all of that work in, I believe, 30%, one third, or even less than that of work, because now there is no integration as such that you need.
Right.
Uh, any processes that are available in orchestrator, they are available. They are available right here for data binding purposes, for data submission purposes. So you can right away access them directly through apps. So that actually cuts down the whole process of integration that you have to build if you're trying to invoke a particular process from an external application. So yeah, those are very good points. Thanks, Andy. So all right, so that actually does for all these basic setup. So let's see if use our form is ready for preview. So we put all these objects here. So let me just do a quick preview. When we do a quick preview, it goes on and it launches on a separate page. So okay, so I can start with basic check here, not necessarily it's going anywhere. Not that we are actually saving this information, but at the same time, we can always validate the values and how it works. So it does validate and does value for the entry that I'm doing. And I would say excellent series, and let's submit. So right now we are not triggering any automation, so it should be just committing feedback is submitted carefully, successfully. So primarily what we are doing here, we are just putting objects here, and then we are putting additional styles and alignment to it. And if you're building more complex form, like if you have a form with 2 columns, right, then you can use containers and tables. If you go here, so let's go back and look at one of the table container. So if you see this container, so this container can actually provide that layout where you can build 2 columns uh, on the page itself. So you can have multiple complex layout, just like what we saw when we were looking at the sample templates available when we are starting out with an app. So those are also good examples to start with, in case if you know already what kind of form you are developing and how many controls you're planning to build in that. All right, let's see. There is a rule over here now. Why it's going over there? Now let me close this. Okay, so that's all right. So that's the basic controls that we can add. And let's look at a few additional things that we talked about. So we talked about events. So in the event section, we can create events. We briefly touched upon it. We also touched upon the container objects that we can create. There are a few additional things we can create, like different validation. If I want to open a page on submit button, I can go ahead and I can define which page I want to open it. It can be a different website, or it can be a different page within UiPath Apps itself. So let's say I have multiple pages created, right? So I can get user input in multiple pages. So if you have a feedback form that has 2 pages or 3 pages, you can create all those 2, 3 pages, and then you can have your You can have a navigation, whether on top of screen or at the bottom of the screen, where you can go back and forth, and that way you can collect all that information. So it provides us a way of building multiple pages, so you can build a complete navigation out of it. A few other event options, if you will. I'm just going through different event options that we can create. We already looked at show message, show or hide spinner, which is where if I'm submitting this data and I want to show a progress, or I want to show a wait screen to the user, I can use the spinner object, and that can also show for how many minutes or we want to show this message and what message we want to show it. So those informations can be there, and you can always disable or delete these objects if you don't need any of them. Let's look at a few more. And start process, we already looked at. If I want to directly start a particular automation here, I can do that. Rest of these objects we will look at. There is another object is reset value. If I go here, I can reset these values. So let's say on this form, when I collected name, email address, and feedback, once the user clicks on the submit button, I want to reset that form. So I can go here and I can pick up what objects I want to reset. So if you see here, right? So as soon as I click over here, I can see all the pages that I have in this app. And I also have all these objects. These are the same objects that I see over here. So I can define which objects I want to get cleared out. So I just have to double click, and all those object values would be cleared out. So once this is available, and that's all that I have to do, I just have to define which items I want to reset. And once this is there, as we mentioned, and you can see this unsaved changes here. This is so auto save happens every 30 seconds. So as soon as we made these changes, we are good to go. And within 30 seconds, it will save. But if I want to preempt it, I can always click on save changes. All right, so this change is done. So let's say we made that small adjustment to this form. So let's run this and see how does that look like. So let's go back to the preview page. I'll close this one. And I can enter the data and check. All right, and if I click on submit here, I can see the feedback is submitted successfully and the screen is not refreshed. So sometimes it takes a few minutes. So that's okay. Let me publish it again.
Yeah, one of the things that we have to be, I would like to point out is, please make it a habit to close the previous version of your app and then do the preview when you're running and testing it, because um, some of the changes that you make on the surface, for example, if you're changing the color of a text box or changing the font or the position of a box, when you refresh it, you will get that change immediately. But if you are actually trying to call an app or you're connecting to a data service, if you make changes to those parts of your app, those connections have to be reformed. And for that to reform, you'll have to close your app that you're already previewing in your browser window and then come back to your designer and hit the preview again. Because you can lose several hours by
Yeah,
not
for
doing
debugging
that.
it.
Yeah, because you will be making your changes, but then you come back and refresh your page. It's not going to work because your preview is nothing but an inline packaging of the app. So when you hit preview, the whole app will be rebuilt for you to view temporarily in your preview window. So please do make that a habit. Please do not go back and refresh the page, because you're going to just lose time debugging a problem that doesn't exist.
Yeah. No, you're right. So that is true. I'm just trying to see. Okay, that's what is this? Okay, so I have another open up page. So let's see. I'm just trying to go and see what's going on over here. So edit rule, show message. Hold on, let me see. Did I create that rule somewhere else? I believe so. No, that's good. That's good. All right, let's not spend too much time. It's quick. I can create it one more time. That's all right. Yeah, sometimes what Andy said is we have seen this happening, and we have definitely we have submitted those review feedbacks back to UiPath team. They have been very attentive and responsive to the issues or challenges that we face, and we share with them. Uh, they come up with frequent updates to take care of those issues. And sometimes this, like what Andy said, it might be just because it hasn't synced up, because again, this is all completely browser based editor, right?
Yeah.
So we can sometimes be very quick than what it can actually
No,
consume all that
it is
information,
it's a hard learned lesson,
right?
Pradeep. I was on a chat with someone and they were trying to troubleshoot an app, and
Mhm.
I did not observe on the screen that they had the designer open in
Another
Chrome,
window.
and they were refreshing the app in the Edge browser. It took me 20 minutes to figure
Yeah.
out that's what the user was doing, and then once we previewed the app, the bug went away. It's a very hard
Yeah.
learned lesson.
Yeah, sometimes it well, we have all been part of these kind of issues. Sometimes that comes, and that's why being a developer, you find these nifty issues that you don't see usually, or at least in theory you don't expect that to happen, but in practicality, there you go. So now it's clearing it up. As soon as we submit, we get a message and all the data gets cleared up. So sometimes it takes a few minutes. So just make sure that it's synced up, and also the editor is not open and you're not trying to do both publish, preview, and editing, continuous editing. All right, so I think that is all the high level overview I wanted to present in today's session. And I definitely would like to see if there are more questions, comments out there that we can answer here. And feel free to unmute yourself if you have any specific questions. Myself and Andy will be happy to answer any of those.
Pradeep, I was just looking the email validation. Does it only look for something specific? Yes, we don't expect to go and validate the domain and everything, but will it ensure that we are adding the @ sign and dot something like
Yeah,
that?
that's the only validation it looks for, that it has a .com and @ symbol, and not the domain itself. So if you conjure up some abc.com, then it will still validate. But the thing is that you can always add additional validations, right? So you can see, you can even define the domain, specific domains. So let's say if you don't put anything, it will just accept everything. But if you define let's say you only want your own organizational organization email as a valid one, you can just define those, and that's all that it will pick up. And you can
At
even block
one place,
certain domains.
yeah, Pradeep, at one place you just type Gmail and not .com or nothing like that. Then it accepts it. So I thought like it doesn't go beyond that or what.
Oh, really? Okay, we'll look into that, but it should not. The basic validation is checking for the email structure. On your domain level validation, you can always add your specific domains. Even you can put your custom error message that you want to display, and that should take care of that. And even you can put some value binding is for data submission. But the validation should take care of that. that part from domain-based validation. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Pradeep, thanks.
All right. Andy, do you have something in chat that you want to emphasize here?
Pradeep, I have added one more question into the chat.
Sure.
It's looking like too much advanced. I'm looking like, but I was just thinking like the way in the ERP systems we have the pages. So first page which has the general data about the item, and then second, third, fourth page has the individual data. So does it allow us to build the multiple pages and have all the information saved in one go?
Yeah, so it does provide you add additional pages if you I briefly touched upon it, but
I saw you showed the additional pages, but we have to navigate those.
Yeah, there is a
correct.
tab
So,
control in the UI elements. You can have multiple tabbed pages, and then
yeah.
each tab can have a page.
So if you want to build that in as a tab control, you're more than welcome to do it. Otherwise, you can add additional pages here, and that way they are available as part of the app, and you can navigate from through a navigation button from one page to another page. And obviously tab control is another way of doing the same thing.
Yeah, Pradeep, you might want to show them the load event. To his point on the second part of his question, how do we get all the information for those pages? Because if we go to a page and go to the onload events of that page, events on the right of that page, yeah, and loaded. So basically, if you have multiple pages, you could load the data for each page in each of the onloaded event of all those pages. Or you could load all the data as the app loads up in the loaded event of the main page, and it will be accessible to all the other pages of your application.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And as far as saving that data is concerned, with that is completely on you whether you want to save data as you move on from one page to another page, or you want to only just do one bulk save at the end of it. Again, that depends on what kind of use case you have, but you can actually have you can save interim data as well when you're navigating from one page to another page, so that just because you don't want to lose any information in between, right, because of any network issue or anything like that.
Yeah.
So but yeah, I mean, those options are available. In some cases, what we even do, that interim data is stored locally in terms of in your data service, or for storage buckets, temporary storage, right? And then when you actually submit that data, then you can finally move that data out to a database itself. So that way you still have cache, data cache, in case of anything, in case of any network connectivity issues. So you're not losing all the information that is captured. All right, I think we are almost on top of the hour. Any other questions that we can answer? This session is very basic. You would see that we just went through the overview of UiPath and the components, features, segments that are available. We'll build on top of this, and we'll talk about more advanced topics in our next upcoming sessions.
Right.
Thank you, Pradeep.
Thank you for your time and joining with us. Diana?
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining tonight. We really appreciate it. Feel free to grab the information out of the chat to make sure that you attend next week's session. We're looking forward to hearing more about this topic. And I just want to thank Pradeep and Andy for hosting the session tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you.